In 1987, I was 31 years old and I was living in Santa Barbara, California. I was married. I had a little daughter that was born in July of that year and a son that was 8 years old. And about a month after the daughter was born, I lifted something too heavy and I ruptured a disc in my back, which the fragments blew out towards my spinal cord. It was my L5-S1. The first doctor I saw said, "I'm sorry, I can't fix this." He was an orthopedic surgeon, and he said, "You're never going to walk again," because I had lost the left leg with weakness and sciatica. And so my colleagues and friends told me to seek a second opinion. So I went to a neurosurgeon in Santa Barbara, and he looked at my MRIs and my x-rays, and he said, "Yes, I can fix this." So he scheduled surgery in December of 1987. He brought on board an orthopedic surgeon for the surgical team, and he had me show up at the hospital the night before the surgery because they had determined that they wanted to make sure that the blown out fragments of the disc had not chipped the spinal cord. So they were going to do a procedure called a myelogram, which means that they inject iodine dye into the back of your neck at your upper cervical vertebrae, and they inject the iodine dye right into the spinal cord. And they don't have you under anesthesia, they just numb the area, and they have you on an x-ray table, and as they tip the x-ray table, the dye with gravity flows down your spinal cord, and they take x-rays of it. So that was the plan, and they told me to hold very still, that I would have headaches for months afterwards if I moved. And so as they began tipping the x-ray table, I immediately started feeling a little funny. And the x-ray tech and the other x-ray tech that was in front of a monitor were talking to each other, and I didn't want to interrupt them. The neurosurgeon and the orthopedic surgeon were both in the room, and they were standing behind the x-ray tech that began pushing on the button on the table to make the table move. And there was also a nurse in the room. And as it proceeded, the table was moving very slowly. I was getting worse and worse with the feeling that I was going to faint. So by the time that I realized I needed to break up their conversation and interrupt them and tell them that something felt like it was going wrong, by the time that happened, I actually couldn't figure out how to open my mouth and say anything. I'd lost the ability to speak. And my mind was very clear, but my body was not responding to what my mind was telling it to do. So I couldn't lift my hand and even touch him either. So I began feeling very panicked, and my eyes soon began rolling to the back of my head, and I was fighting to stay present in the room and not faint. And the last thing that happened was I started hyperventilating. And he heard me, the man standing next to the table, and he leaned over my face and he looked into my face, and my eyes were rolling backwards. And he then leaned backwards and he looked to see where his thumb was on the table. And the very last thing that I saw before I lost consciousness was him showing the shock that when he saw that where his thumb was on the table, the shock look of, "Oh no, I've just done something wrong" kind of look. And so my eyes shut, and in that second of shutting my eyes, I immediately opened them, and they weren't in my body anymore, they were up on the ceiling. So it was a feeling of being all of my consciousness being up on the ceiling, clear and astute, and my body being down on the x-ray table, looking not more than a wetsuit and not feeling very attached to it. And he was calling code blue, and so I said, if I'm up here and my body's down there and he's calling code blue, I think I must have just died. So at that point in time, there was a very big feeling of some presence that was next to me. And the presence felt so eternal and so loving and accepting. And I felt as though I knew the presence even better than I knew anyone in my present life. And so I didn't look to see if there was any light or aura or physical apparition. It was simply, I knew who this was, and I began talking to this presence and saying how much I wanted to go back into my life for the sake of my children who were young, to contribute to them so that they would grow up to be the human beings that they were destined to be. And I then also knew in that moment up on the ceiling that I had a purpose that had either been set out for me or I had set out for myself, and that I had not completed it. And it was a very important purpose, and I needed to go on with that life to complete that purpose. So I also said that to the being. And down below, they were doing CPR. They immediately began that, and they got an oxygen card into the room, and they put an oxygen mask on the body. And then they brought in a heart monitor, and it was flatlining. And, I mean, when they connected it to me, it was flatlining. And then about 8 to 10 minutes had passed, and the doctors were having a discussion. They were standing behind the CPR people who were pressing on my chest, and they said that too much time had passed and that they needed to do something. So the orthopedic surgeon said, stand clear to the CPR team. And they stepped back, and the orthopedic surgeon stepped forward by 2 steps, took his fist from behind his back and swung it over his head and slammed it into my chest. That's called a precardial thump. And when that thump happened, the being that was up on the ceiling with me, now I watched my body react to the thump, but I wasn't in my body and it didn't hurt. And the being then said something to me. And in this very calm voice said, but if you go back, you'll still be in your marriage. What will you do? And right then I was shown all of these flashes of incidents that had happened in the 5 years I'd been married to the person. And I was in an abusive situation that I didn't know how to rectify or escape. And I was then given the time to think about what I had just seen, because I had been burying those moments when the apologies came or the presents were given to rectify the anger that this person had had and the repercussions that he instigated on myself and my children. Then I was trying to put those into a box and forget about them and give him a chance to be a better person. And I really wanted him to grow and be better. And so up on the ceiling, it was very clear that I had been bearing a lot of really negative stuff that I needed to address. So I was given the time up there to evaluate what I needed to do, and I came to a decision, and then I said to the being, if you let me go back, I promise you I'll get strong enough to leave him. And in that very moment, the second precardial thump was done onto my chest by the orthopedic surgeon. Now, that was probably momentarily after the first one, but up on the ceiling, the time felt like it was stretched out quite well. And I was given all the opportunity I needed to make the decision that I needed for my life. The minute that he did the precardial thump, the orthopedic surgeon, my eyes shut from up on the ceiling, and I opened my eyes a second later to be looking right up his arm that was just struck my chest and right into his eyes. And I began talking into the oxygen mask and said, what happened? And the nurse leaned over my face and said, don't talk, please, we need to stabilize you. So I waited for about 20 minutes until they took the oxygen mask off and they stabilized me. And when they took that oxygen mask off my face, everything blurted out. What just happened? I was on the ceiling. I could see everything. What just happened? The orthopedic surgeon was quiet, but the neurosurgeon, he rolled his eyes and he said, oh, brother. The whole team was standing there, and I wanted to validate what had just happened to me. And I said, no, I was up on the ceiling. I could see and hear everything down below. She's the person who was calling on the phone for the defib unit. And she came in with the oxygen card and put the oxygen mask on my face. And that man came in with the heart monitor, connected it up to me, and I watched it flatline. And they were doing CPR on me. And you two were standing behind them, and you spoke, and you said this, and you said that, and I quoted the doctor's conversation between the two of them. And then I said, you, the orthopedic surgeon, took 2 steps forward, hit my chest twice, and the second time I came back.